Welcome to Down the Garden Path. I'm your host, Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and plant lover. I enjoy discussing down to earth tips and advice to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. And I also aim to bring you interesting and relevant topics to educate you all about the landscaping and horticultural industry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Down the Garden Path. Thank you for joining me here today. Today, I wanted to talk about saving your annuals. Now, considering it's mid October, you're probably thinking, what am I talking about? But I'm sure some of you, if not most of you, have a pot of annuals that you bought long time ago, April, May, that oddly enough, are looking pretty good outside, or even one or two of the plants in a mixed container are looking really good outside. And that's why you haven't thrown them away or put them in the compost bag or into the compost as you await putting in a Christmas arrangement. So I'm here to tell you that there is a way for you to overwinter many of the annuals you may have in that container. Um, or even maybe one of your neighbors' containers that they're not interested in doing it, so that you might not have to buy that annual next year. And so it's not a foolproof method. There's a few variables, and there's some plants that you can do two different ways. And I wanted to cover that all with you today. But I just wanted to let you know that it is not too late to do it. And I think it's worth a try. And I'm looking forward to trying it with some of the plants. I don't buy a lot of annuals, but I do have. So for our listeners who are listening to the podcast, if you check me out on YouTube, I'm showing you what I call a cigar plant. And you can see how beautiful it looks in October. And it's a new to me plant. It's very tropical looking. It's in a hanging basket and it has bright reddish orange or orangey red flowers that are tubular shaped, and the hummingbirds love it. So, in addition to planting native plants, I picked up a hanging basket of cigar plant so that I could attract and continue to attract hummingbirds to my garden. Now, shockingly, that little uh, pot I got that from, from the recycling bin. I actually just bought a 4-inch plant, and I think I put 2 of them in that hanging basket, and that's how full it got. So I have read about how I could save it and maybe use it again, grow it for next year. So I'm excited to tell you all about that. So let's get started. There's a few different ways to do it, and again, that depends on your plant. So the first method is to, especially if you have a mixed container with a few different plants in it, and maybe some of them have look like they're kind of given up the ghost and they're done, and a couple others look really good. So scoop those out and put them in a new pot by themselves with a bit of new soil. You do want to treat that once you've done that. If you've got a few of them, you want to do that. Put them all in. I suggest actually backing up and starting with picking up a boot tray or some kind of maybe a lid to if lots of times when we have Rubbermaid containers, the containers disappear, but we still have the lids. Anything like that. Anything that's plastic that can take a bit of moisture on them, but that has a little bit of a lip. That's why those boot trays for our winter boots, I think work great. And, you can take some gravel from outside and put that on that tray. And then, so that way, when you water, we're going to create a little bit of humidity for that plant, and you're not worrying about the surface that you're putting your plants on. So that's a little bit of setting the stage. But we're going to start by bringing in the whole plant, and you're going to pot it up. You're going to not give it a ton of water, give it up just a little bit. And if it's really wet from being outside, then don't, so you just want it to be lightly damp. And you can spray the plant with Safer's insecticidal soap or sprinkle some diatomaceous earth. It's a natural product that helps with crawling insects when they crawl over it. it kind of takes care of them. Or our friends at Bios Nutrients have an herbal plant soap that they also have had extremely great success with in dealing with insects in plants. And they highly recommend that for any tropical plants you're bringing inside, and would work for the annual plants as well. So you can check out their website. There'll be a note in our show notes about that. So you're going to, find that area where you want to keep them. It might even be in the garage. You do want to keep these plants cooler. You don't want them to freeze. So if they're going to freeze in the garage, then that's not a great idea. The basement is cooler. That's great, but we do want a bit of light. So they want a little bit of light, and they want to, um, we want them to kind of go dormant. So it is important when you're digging them up that the plant is still healthy. And I know we're a little bit late, depending on where you are in the world, in to do this, but I still think that you can be successful. So once you've set up the location, that is great. You may want to trim the plant a little bit. So we're really going to treat it almost like a house plant. So you might want to trim it, cut it back a little bit, or cut back on watering, and put it in a cooler with a little bit of light, but it doesn't need to be a ton of direct light at all. And we're going to let that plant rest over the winter. So you don't want it to dry out, but you do want to add some water, but you don't want to add a ton of water because it's not going to be actively growing. It's just going to be resting. And then as we get into the February, March, and we start to get longer days, you'll start to see maybe a little bit of new growth, especially if it was a plant, and we'll talk about the different varieties, but especially if it's a plant that you needed to cut back quite a bit, you'll start to see some greenery. And then we can step up with the diluted fertilizing. We still want to dilute it and start fertilizing them as the spring approaches. So we'll come back for those details and which plants I suggest doing that method. The other method is actually taking cuttings. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with these beautiful, colorful plants with this like very nice textured leaves, coleus. So you can do option one and bring in the whole coleus plant, or you can take cuttings like I have here. Again, check me out on YouTube. That is what I'm going to do. If you look at the cigar plant and look at how great the foliage is looking still and how woody the stems are, I'm going to take cuttings for that plant. So yeah, so that is the other method, as you kind of treat the plant that you're bringing in as the mother, and then you're going to cut off all the little babies and plant those up. Uh, Pelargonium geraniums, that's often you can do it both ways. You can treat it as a house plant and cut it back and keep it all intact and keep it as a plant and let it go dormant and then start waking it up again in the spring. Or you can take cuttings and root those, and then you have little baby plants. So that's another option as well. So yeah, so as far as the cutting method goes, there's a couple ways. You definitely want to remove some of the bottom leaves, and you can root them in water. And once you start to see a good amount of leaves grow, I definitely would take smaller cuttings. Like this stem is probably, even that is probably a little too tall. So I'm gonna make it smaller and then put that in a little cup and root that in water. And then when it starts to show a good amount of roots, I would recommend saving some 3-inch pots, or if you have a cell pack with some smaller, not really the tiny cell packs of the seed starting trays, but the ones that are, go 3 inches square, and filling them with new potting soil. And once your coleus has um, roots, then you can start putting them into those pots. And that will be similar with the cigar plant and similar with any other plant that you can take cuttings from in order to root them into baby plants. So yeah, so that's one way to do it. But again, to go back and say you can bring in the whole coleus plant, uh, clean it off, cut it back a little bit, and put it in a pot with some new soil. Also, treat it to make sure that you're not bringing in any insects, but then treat it like a house plant with some indirect light, cooler temperatures, and let it rest over the winter. And then, as you start watering sparingly while it's going dormant, and then as the light starts to change in February, March, adding diluted fertilizer and encourage them to get going again. So, so yeah, so that is the two different ways, two different methods. So again, treating it like a house plant or taking cuttings from the main plant, disposing of the main roots and saving the cuttings and rooting those. And then the third way is something that's more that has more of a tuber. And that is the most popular one. And it's such a pretty plant if you have a shade garden, are tuberous begonias. So those ones we definitely want to find my notes. They start growing, they're underground tubers. So you need to dig those up, and they do require really to go to sleep, the winter dormancy. So you need to start, if you're going to bring them inside or if you still have them outside and they're dry, you definitely want to reduce the water until you start to see the plant actually dying back, because you want it to really start to go dormant. So really go to sleep. Once the plant has the tops and the leaves and the foliage and the flowers have kind of fallen off and dried up, again, there's still a tuber in there. The plant isn't dead, and you let the soil completely dry. Then really, all signs show that the that it has gone dormant. So then you can take it and carefully remove the tuber from the soil. So you want to shake off all the loose soil. You don't want to wash it off. You definitely want to wait till it's dry. And the tuber is really found the stems and just underneath the ground of the pot. It's not like a deep that you have to dig for it or anything. So it's really what the stems that are above the surface, right as they meet the soil, that's where you're going to find the tuber. So you want to very carefully clean it off of soil and old roots, and you can put it in a paper bag, a cardboard box. You can toss some vermiculite, anything that, in case if you think there might be a slight chance of some moisture in there, maybe some newspaper, so maybe shred up the newspaper, that type of thing. So you want them to really dry. Uh, and rest for the winter. So they definitely require that winter dormancy. So in early spring, you want to start waking those tubers back up again. So you want to take a look at them and make sure there's no mildew, no decay on them. And then you would pot them up in fresh soil. You want to give them, and what we're now doing is giving them a head start, um, and getting them going for spring. So you want to start potting them up with some fresh soil and move them more into a bright light. So whether a bright windowsill or a grow light is a good idea too. I think that would really help in all these situations if you're wanting to be successful at overwintering your annuals. So we want to make sure that it's not planted too deep in the soil, and we want to water it well and fertilize it lightly once you've potted it up. But then we don't want to water it again for quite a while. So you don't want to water it until you start to see new stems and new little sprouts. So you see that it's starting to get rooted. Because if you water too much before it really develops the roots to take up the water, then you're really just going to create uh, mildew and rot in your plant. So once you pot it up with new soil, once you've started, it's had the winter rest and you want to start getting it going again, you want to give it a good watering with diluted fertilizer. And then you want to wait till you see. And it's similar to with cuttings where you want to wait till you see the roots happening before you put it in the soil. This one, we're putting it in the soil and we're hoping the soil is going to help wake it up. And once you start to see little buds forming on the tops of the tuber, like in the soil, then you know it's starting to work. Um, it's a good idea in that case to really work with smaller pots, because then you know it's gotten enough water, but not too much water for the size of the tuber. And once you really start to see the tuber, really start to see some leaves and some new fresh signs of growth, then you can step up the fertilizer and the water on more of a regular basis. So it's just one of those things that's patient, and from one year to another, from one pot to another, there's a lot of variables. So this whole plan of trying to extend our budget of annuals is really an experiment. So there's no hard and fast rules. There's no perfect way to do it, and there's no guarantee for success either. So I just want to give you a lot of tips and let you know that I think it's worth trying. And I'm looking forward to trying for my first time this year as well. I think it's a way to save money, of course, and it's a way to kind of do something different in this winter season as we're approaching. But it's not a high needs thing. Like, you're not having to babysit and check on these plants every day, so don't worry about that. Uh, so, like I said, there are many plants that you can do this with. And I think the treating it as a house plant, I think you'll have good success with coleus, with perennial geraniums. Did you know you can even do it with million bells? You can cut those back and make sure you just have some green leaves in the pot, but you can cut those. It tends to be the hanging in a lot of hanging baskets or in big container arrangements. They tend to be shaped like bells, and they're the cascading plant. They look like kind of like small petunias. That is Million Bells or Calibrachoa. You can even do that, cutting off all of those hanging foliage and all the flowers. It's kind of hard to do, so that you just have a small, maybe 4-inch pot, 6-inch pot of just leaves, and letting it rest and letting it, treating it like a house plant, with low light all winter, and then as again introducing it to more light and more fertilizer, a brighter light for them, especially because they are heavy feeders and really require a lot more light. So depending on your space and what you have available to you, make it easy for yourself. If you don't have any place with lots of high light, then focus on things like coleus and uh, what was I just talking about? Coleus and begonias, which require, some bright light, but not as much sun as a geranium might require, or a Calibrachoa million bells might require. So you can kind of set up what you want to do based on the kind of light you have available to you. So I think I could be quite successful with the begonias. I think the cigar plant might be a little tricky for me, but I think I will use some grow lights. I've been purchasing some for my house plants to do better in some of my lower light corners of my house. So I may not do vegetables again, starting vegetables this year, and use the grow lights for annuals, because I think that might be a better use of my time. So if you have any questions, I love to hear from you, to see if you've been successful, if your favorite thing that you like to grow, that you like to take cuttings of. I would love to hear it. And like I said, it's set up your location and your materials first. Move your annuals into the garage, get them out of the frost if you're not quite ready with a setup, as we were approaching Halloween and the next a week and a half. You can start to do that, and get like some trays ready, or some plastic lids, so that you have some place for the water to go, and you have that ability to create some humidity. Some plants, and I think this might be the case for the cigar plant, is once I start rooting, so I'm going to root them in water. And once they've rooted, I'm going to put them in small pots of soil. And I may just cover that with some Ziploc bags over some of the pots just to create some humidity. I think they're much more tropical and much more, especially because they're so woody, they may need a little bit more humidity to kind of get going. So yeah, so I'm going to experiment. Maybe I'll do a Ziploc bag on a couple and none on the a couple others. There's really no huge expense because I already have these plants, and I'm sure you do too, or your neighbor might. I know I love this coleus and I love this color, but I just got it from my neighbor next door. And so I said to her, I think I want to try and reproduce this for next year. And then I can even share it back with her. So she's excited to try because she actually has a perennial geranium, or sorry, not perennial geranium, annual geranium, pelargonium, and she asked, could she do it with that as well? And I said, absolutely. So I love that there's two ways to do it by treating it like a house plant, especially if you're only wanting to do one or two, right? Then it doesn't take up a lot of space. But if you are trying to grow more, maybe you want to share with people, or maybe you have more containers in your house, in your yard, and you want to create more annuals, then I think cutting's a good way to go as well. I hope you enjoy this and I hope you give it a try. I also want to remind you that there's other plants that are similar, like canna bulbs. You can, if you've got a plant, a mixed arrangement that came with a big canna, that tends to have a bigger tropical leaf with a bigger flower head. You can save those bulbs as well, very similar to how we save the begonias, in the sense we want to dust them all off, make sure they're dried out, remove them from soil, make sure there's no moisture, and store them in a cardboard box or a paper bag for the winter until we pot them back up again in the spring. So very similar. And I think I'm not an expert in doing dahlia bulbs, but I believe that's very much the same way as well, that you want to keep them dry and keep them cool all winter long, keep them in the dark until, February and end of February, beginning of March, when you start to bring them back out and pot them up to start growing again and giving them, slowly introducing them to some light and slowly introducing them to diluted fertilizer and then ramping up from there. So there's a lot of options with all the different annuals we have. And if we save a little bit of money next year, then you can buy it, have extra maybe to buy another perennial or a shrub for your garden. And I think it will also get you thinking when you go to buy, if you are going to buy a mixed arrangement next year, whether you do this or not, it'll get you really thinking to find that one that has some really interesting plants that you want to work at saving. Maybe this podcast comes out too late and you've already tossed your arrangement. That's okay. Have a listen, and then you have the plan for next year. And so that you can, when you're picking your arrangement, you're making sure there's coleus or there's a cigar plant even in amongst your mix. And that way you have a plan for next fall. So let me know, reach out, let me know if you like this idea, if you've done it before, if you are going to try it this year, like with me. Thanks for listening, everybody. And thank you, as always, for joining me down the garden path. Bye for now.